morning, television neighbors. Today's topic, I'm going to talk about, I guess I'll talk about libertarian politics a little bit. I was talking with some friends online, and they were asking a lot of questions, and I have a little bit of experience in this field because I've run for office as a libertarian candidate. I don't know, I've kind of lost count. It's probably around 5 times, but the very first time the Libertarian Party was not recognized as a political party in Ohio. So technically, even though I ran as a libertarian, as I described myself, the state of Ohio did not recognize me as a libertarian for all kinds of reasons that we'll get into later. And they listed the state of Ohio's law required elections officials to list me as unaffiliated. So I went to them and I said, I am a libertarian, and then they said, we don't recognize libertarian as a thing, so we're going to lie to people and say that you are unaffiliated. Now, a lot of this goes back to, the way that political parties were supposed to be started and founded. So in Ohio, it seems like it makes sense. Essentially, if you and a group of your buddies want to get together and start a political party, then the idea is that you agree to work on this together, so you form a committee, because all the best things are done with committees. And so you form a committee, which is a group of people who share this common interest and want to work together toward this end. And you form a committee, and then you go and you get a piece of paper called a petition. And that petition is just an ordinary sheet of paper, like you might get out of a photocopier or something. Though they tend to be legal sized paper, probably because it's a legal document. I don't know the history. It'd be kind of interesting for me to hear what the history of that involves. And you have to print off a special form that is created by the Secretary of State. And it just says that, hey, the group of like 5 or so people on this document, and it lists their names and their home addresses, we all want to form a political party. And then you just get together, and you have to get signatures from registered voters. They call them certified electors, meaning that a person who can elect someone and is certified by the state to do so. So not everyone who is an adult is a certified elector. They can be, they can just be, like, you have to go and register to vote, and then that makes you a certified elector. And also, only certified electors can run for office. So if you ever see, and this is Ohio, by the way, Ohio laws I'm talking about. The laws may differ per state, but every time I see one of those feel-good news stories like, town elects dog mayor, I really think that we shouldn't waste our time with stories like that, because I'm pretty sure in every state, in order to run for any kind of office, you have to be a certified elector, and in order to do that, you have to be human. So it's really just a bullshit story. It's like, Army elects attack helicopter as top general. It's not gonna happen. It's just not, it's not possible. So it makes for a story that's really clickbaity and stuff, and gets a lot of attention from people who, I don't know, want to waste their time with trivial nonsense, I guess. But it's not really a thing that can happen from anything I've ever seen in election laws around the country. But, I can always be surprised. I did want to get out there. There are some places, if you're curious about this stuff, there's Ballot Access News, which is put together by a guy named Richard Winger. And this guy's passion is just the democratic election process. He doesn't seem to care what party or anything. He just wants to make sure that everyone has a chance to be heard. Everyone can get on the ballot, with minimal regulation. He doesn't really see it as a problem. I don't really either, to have like a billion parties on the ballot. But a lot of people do. So anyway, he covers that legal wrangling back and forth of the state trying to keep lots of choices off the ballot. And, it's kind of, there's state level law and there's federal level law that he tends to cover. But the federal level stuff is interesting because it kind of forces the hand of states. And generally, from what I've seen, the federal stuff, I don't know, I think it goes both ways. Sometimes there's a federal ruling that really puts the screws to minor parties, and then other times there are federal rulings that really pave the way and open up the doors. When I ran for lieutenant governor of Ohio in 2006, which was my first political race, this isn't something I just woke up and decided to do. I was actively trying to help get candidates elected that supported my overall philosophy, and in a general sense, and the theory being that while no candidate can be perfect, at least they can be more along the lines of how I think of things. I mean, it's the major party candidates were not how I was thinking about things, and so I wanted to support alternative voices. And I knew that it was very unlikely to get elected, and that's an understatement. I would revise that to say that it's impossible for a minor party candidate to get elected in Ohio. And Hotel Alpha Sierra 7178.
Manual recording will now start.
I'll try and cut that in so you can see what I was objecting to. Anyway, no promises though, because it takes a while. But anyway, there's so yeah, I was running for lieutenant governor. I was asked to. The guy running for governor didn't have a running mate, and he seemed like a pretty good guy as a candidate goes. He shared my philosophy, and he was also highly educated professionally in what I think are some of the most critical responsibilities of the governor. So the governor, it used to be kind of more of like a military general, but now I think it's really important for a governor to have a firm understanding of economics. The guy I ran with, his name was Bill Pearce. He spent his entire career studying the Ohio's economy, and he was the head of the econ department at Case Western Reserve for a number of years. So he was better prepared than the other two candidates. One of them was a career politician. His name is Roger Blackwell, and he's served since then in a number of political posts as an appointee and stuff like that. And then the other guy was Ted Strickland, who actually ended up winning. He was a preacher and a prison psychiatrist, but mostly a preacher from my understanding of it. And he was Ohio's governor for quite a few years there, and I don't know. It's I'll let history speak to that one. I think we would have been better off with Bill Pearce as our governor, but the laws prevent that kind of thing from happening. So essentially, one of the reasons, why do libertarians run? Why do minor party candidates run for things like governor? When a lot of people ask us, well, you could just run for dog catcher and win, and that's true to a certain extent. A lot of the the lower level local offices are winnable, and we have in Ohio, I've seen a lot of libertarians win spots on rural city councils and stuff like that. Typically not big city things. The races are very large and expensive, but where it's a small race and there's kind of a rebel spirit, I guess, in the community, then it's more likely to see a libertarian get elected. Now, interestingly, a lot of the libertarians that I've seen get elected to positions like that, they pretty much, it's like the LP seems to be a little bit like a booster rocket. I'm thinking of one guy in particular. I used to talk with him all the time on Skype and stuff like that, and then he got elected to city council, and he just never had time to talk. And I don't remember anyone in the party like flipping out over how he was just revolutionizing the city government with his libertarian philosophies. I think there was a guy locally in Gahanna City Council. There were actually two libertarians for a time on the city of Gahanna City Council. One was John McAllister, and I'm trying to remember the other guy's name. I knew John better, so that's why I remember his name. But he did a really good job of at least getting a hearing for libertarian views. Like he would voice the libertarian perspective. Why don't we not use force to achieve this goal? In the council meetings, and it was very popular with people. And he was term limited, so he got in and he stayed in and he kept getting reelected and stuff, but eventually he just wasn't allowed to participate anymore. So it's an interesting thing, is a lot of times people want term limits, but when you have a good guy in there, the term limits can also kick them out as well. And in the major parties, it's just a carousel. For the libertarian, the term limit resulted in him just essentially retiring from politics. When you have the major parties, they just hop over to another office, and then because of name recognition and they've got a big supporter base and all this kind of stuff, it tends to be rough for an opponent to someone who was formerly an elected official to become elected. So like there was a group called the Buckeye Firearms Association, which I was a volunteer with for many years, and I still support a lot of what they're trying to do in Ohio, but they're pretty much the Ohio branch of the NRA, and they toe the NRA line and they back the NRA candidates, and sometimes that comes back to bite them. I mean, a really good example is they were a big supporter of Strickland. In my race, I believe they said that I was also a good candidate. So they didn't really endorse me, but they said that I was okay. But then later they revised the rules of how they considered candidates, and they decided they were only going to rate and recommend candidates who'd already served in public office. So this is kind of a system to I don't know. It was designed to exclude minor parties, and because before that they didn't really have any problem recommending people coming out of the woodwork. So, but yeah, so the reason that libertarians run for offices like governor instead of dog catcher is because state law requires it for them to be a party. There are two ways for them to become a party. One way is to go and petition, fill out that petition form, get enough signatures to get on the ballot because your group of buddies went and asked a high enough percentage of all the people in Ohio to do this. And then the other approach is to run someone for office and then as a partisan candidate. And I'm not exactly sure how this is supposed to work, because right now the Libertarian Party in Ohio does not have party status. So I'm guessing what they're doing is they're running a candidate just as like a placeholder, as an unaffiliated candidate perhaps, and then they're going to try to get enough petition signatures to become a party, and then they're going to change the candidate over to a libertarian candidate or something like that. I haven't really been in the loop with what the current strategy is, but I'm guessing that's what they're doing. But anyway, long story short is if you have a candidate who is in a party and then they get that, the same, a signature at someone's doorstep is as good as a vote in an election. So if you have an election and you have a libertarian candidate on the ballot and that percentage of people votes for the governor candidate that they have, then you're going to end up with that counts, and that gives the party ballot access, they call it. So that's why they're running, is fundamentally they think it's going to get them ballot access. And it's kind of difficult to explain to people that a lot of this stuff just doesn't really make any sense, but it's the law, and so you have to do it. And one of the things that I think is interesting is that the petition forms, they essentially are asking the person who signs that to attest. Like when I ran as a candidate, the petition forms usually said, by signing this form, you promise to go to the polls on election day and vote for Mark Noble as the candidate for this. So you're really kind of locking in your vote. I haven't seen this enforced, but a couple of people didn't want to sign because of it. And I've been told, and I don't know whether or not this would stand up in court, that if I had enough resources and money, I could go and look up all the valid signatures on like let's say a Democrat or Republican's signature forms, and it says that they swear that they're going to go and vote for this person. Well, I could go, and I wouldn't know if they voted for the person in the general election or in the primary, but what I would know is whether or not they voted at all. So if they didn't vote at all, and if I could find enough people, because there's often a very slim margin. I mean, I kind of went overkill just because I was a minor party candidate and they love kicking people off for technicalities, so I always got way more people than I needed. But sometimes the margin is like 1 or 2 signatures on these major party people, and they can compensate for that with a huge, legal teams that are funded by donors, spending, $250,000, $500,000 on the legal defense of, getting 1 or 2 signatures on the ballot. But in my case, I didn't have a swarm of lawyers hungry to get me elected, so it didn't really work out that well. So, but yeah, what you can do is you can go and you can get it. You can show that enough of those certified electors who promised they would vote for the person didn't even show up to the election, that you can retroactively remove the candidate from the ballot. And this is something that, in an age of better than ever optical character recognition and handwriting recognition software, I think it would really be important for minor parties to develop some of this technology, which is, you might think, oh wow, that's pie in the sky stuff, but there are tools available in the cloud that are very affordable, that relatively junior devs, I mean, a lot of libertarians are senior devs, so you could get these people together and you could make a system for minor parties, or even the open source community could do a project to do this. You get a bunch of people together and you use cloud, AI technology to do handwriting recognition and OCR. You process the scanned petition forms and you get all the information and you match it up to the voter records for the appropriate election. And you find all the cases where someone, you find out, first of all, you'd probably want to target races where the candidate just barely made it onto the ballot. And so where the candidate just barely made it onto the ballot by like 1 or 2 signatures, you run it through this system, you go and you look up, let's say, if they only made it onto the ballot by like 25, or by like 1 signature or 25 signatures or something, then you go and you run it and you try to find like 50 or 100 people who signed saying that they were going to do it, and then they didn't show up and they didn't vote at all. And what that shows you is that they couldn't have possibly, what you're doing when you sign a petition signature is you're signing maybe an affidavit. I don't know exactly, this is probably be a subject for some legal wrangling, like what is that signature? But essentially they lied, and it says right on the document that like doing it, lying on that document is election falsification, which is like a 5th degree felony in Ohio. And the thing is, with a lot of people, like a lot of like minor party candidates, I was just getting like neighbors and stuff to sign for me. So I wouldn't like to see a lot of those people get charged with a felony. I don't think the charges would stick. I think that would really make the state look really bad if they started prosecuting people with a felony for, you know, signing petitions and not showing up to the election. So what I'd imagine is they'd probably just kind of go, oh, you made a mistake, slap on the hand, you know, don't do it again. But then the effect, though, would be that the candidate or the ballot issue would not actually be valid, and so even though it may have won in the election, it would get removed. And so if you want to do this against major parties, you're going to have to run a third-party candidate, and then you're also going to have to run this process against both of the major party candidates. So it's, you know, it's kind of a thing that could work, but there are situations where it couldn't, and there might be situations where all you're going to do, if you follow through with it, is just flip it from a Republican winning to a Democrat winning. So, you know, that's one of the things, a lot of this, you know, when I ran, I forget what year, I think it was 2004, I ran against Mary Jo Kilroy and Steve Stivers, and some people thought that I cost Steve Stivers, the Republican, the election. Now, don't feel too bad for him. He later ended up winning a seat in Congress. This was a congressional, or it was a U.S. House race. So yeah, congressional race. Don't feel too bad because both of them ended up serving due to the carousel of politics. He just tried another year and won. But yeah, I actually was down at a Tea Party rally one time in downtown Columbus, and I don't think the person recognized me, but I actually overheard some guys talking about how horrible that Mark Noble guy was because he cost Steve Stivers the election. Now, I'm sure as a YouTube viewer, you've heard of all the wonderful things that Steve Stivers and Mary Jo Kilroy accomplished in office, so it really mattered to you who won. And like I said, one was in office and then the other was in office, so I think it's kind of a wash. But yeah, I mean, I just wanted to talk a little bit about this. I got to wrap it up, but you know, some people were asking me about some of this stuff, and so I wanted to talk about like why libertarians do it. One thing I didn't really get into is, I mean, maybe I touched on it a little bit, is why it's a waste of time. And I think the reason that I think it is a waste of time, after wasting a lot of time on it myself, I mean, it's not just I'm not some sideline person saying, oh, that's a waste of time. It's someone who really did try to make it not a waste of time for many years. I think about a decade. It's a waste of time because the goalposts will always be moved by the state. So no matter what you achieve and accomplish, they will, at first it will be innocent, plausible changes, but later on it gets to the point where it is an actual conspiracy. And that recently happened in the case of Charlie Earl, who was a candidate for governor of Ohio, and he actually had served in the Ohio House of Representatives as a Republican, I think during the 80s. And he was running for governor. And the current governor, John Kasich, was very worried about, well, I don't know if he personally was worried, but his people were worried. And so they went, and in Ohio, you can challenge a candidate from your own party. So they found this guy who was registered as a libertarian several times in a row, meaning he voted in a libertarian primary a couple times. But none of the libertarians in the part of the state, you know, no one had ever met him, no one had ever heard the guy's name. He was just, he was on paper a libertarian. And then all of a sudden, one day this guy comes out of nowhere, who was he was a tradesman. I mean, he didn't particularly know anything about politics. And then he just came out of nowhere with this huge legal team and challenged all the libertarian candidates in Ohio. I ended up staying on the ballot because they didn't even challenge me, and I had something like an 80 or 90% validity rate, and I mean, it was going to be very difficult to challenge me. But I wasn't running for a state, I was running for, I think, state representative. So, you know, it was from a signature standpoint, the easiest petition-wise to get done. I think I did it in 2 weekends, or in 1 weekend. I just went out on Saturday and collected signatures, went in on Sunday, collected signatures, and then on Monday I showed up at the Board of Elections and turned it in. So it was pretty easy for me to get on the ballot. But and it was just my neighborhood. But anyway, the GOP, they went after everyone else at the running at the state level, and just one by one they started questioning who was circulating the petitions, the validity of signatures, just kind of nitpicking one by one. And it was ostensibly this guy from up in the Cleveland area who's like a tradesman or something. He did like plumbing, or maybe like a handyman or something. So apparently this guy just took issue with all this stuff and just started nitpicking it, and it was really the legal team. And then, so anyway, we smelled something fishy, and so we dug into it in a big court case to try to protect our candidates. And luckily we had volunteer lawyers. It wasn't because we had lots of money. There are just some people out there who, on principle, they're attorneys that provide pro bono services, and they may get paid some to cover some time and expenses, but for the most part, they're doing it out of the kindness of their heart and a love of liberty, so I appreciate that. But they went and they dug into it, and through the process of discovery, we just found all of these documents. I mean, it was just a ridiculous case. I can try and I'll try and post a link to it in the comments if you want to look over some of the documents in it. It was crazy. I mean, like, the judge originally was talking about maybe recusing himself because he was golfing buddies with all of the Republicans involved, and we eventually got the emails and SMS messages, so right back there to that, you should always encrypt. We got all their unencrypted emails and text messages, and it was like they were denying that the GOP's big donors were, funding this law firm. Like, this guy, this handyman, he had racked up like over $500,000 in legal expenses, and the fees are still going up. So like, where's a guy like that going to get that kind of money? And it was just constant wrangling in courts for months and months. Like, we're not going to tell. Oh, I didn't know. I mean, there was perjury involved, all this kind of stuff. And it was clearly demonstrated in federal court to be a conspiracy against the Libertarian Party by the GOP operatives and the GOP itself at the highest levels. And I have no doubt in my mind that Kasich knew about it, was involved, and said, yeah, do it. But even though it's all on paper, Kasich's still the governor, and it's all these people, most of the people involved were appointees. I think the Secretary of State, same guy. So yeah, nothing bad happened to all these people, even though it was demonstrated in federal court. And the guy who actually brought the suit, he has the distinction of, I don't ever want this to happen to me, but a federal judge on the record labeled this guy a guileless dupe. A guileless dupe. Like, if a federal judge labels you a guileless dupe, that has to hurt. I mean, that's like awful. Like, that is a finding of fact. Like, wow, that's harsh. So yeah, that's the biggest flame I've ever seen. But maybe there are some more. I'm sure attorney friends will pipe up. Oh no, a federal judge said far worse on the record one time. I'm not surprised. So anyway, I just want to talk a little bit about that. So what I've covered today, just to try to recap for myself, is I talked a little bit about like why someone would run, how someone starts a party, why someone would run for governor. It's because they want to preserve their party status so that they can run all these down ticket candidates. I talked about some technical ideas of how minor parties could implement technology to really undermine the way that major parties do things. And I also talked a little bit about what happens when you do this stuff wrong, or when you start doing things right enough that the major parties start getting involved in moving the goalposts on you. I didn't really get into some of the things that the Libertarian Party does wrong. I'd advise that anyone interested in that subject would read the free book and audiobook, How Not to Achieve Freedom, at freedomainradio.com in the free books section. That is a pretty good assessment of most of the stuff that I would say. Essentially, a lot of delusion, a lot of people having failures and then trying to spin them as successes, and then repeating that process over, and selling out their core values. I ran into a lot of people who they thought it would be unpopular. Libertarians have to be anti-tax. They just have to be anti-tax. Go ahead and argue with me to the end of the world. The Libertarian pledge is, I will not advocate the initiation of force to further social or political goals. That's exactly what taxation does. You can't be a Libertarian and sign the Libertarian pledge, as all Libertarian candidates are required to do. You can't do that and not fight against taxes at every possible turn, in every possible way. So I ran into a bunch of people who were a Libertarian candidate and a Libertarian officer in the party and stuff, but then they weren't anti-tax. They, they were selling out their values. And it's spelled out in the party platform. So, yeah, I ran into a lot of that. And, those are just a couple of the things. And then also, my petitioning process, it worked. It got unheard of validity rates. The Board of Elections told me that. They said, we've never seen so many valid signatures from any party. You did a wonderful job. And the secret there, I'll just say it, because no one cares what the secret is, because the major parties don't need it and the minor parties aren't going to use it. But I went and I pulled the data from the Board of Elections. I used a PowerShell script to pull the data down, create a walking list. You can narrow it down because it was a huge database. Narrowed it down to a walking list so that I had the most current data possible. Then I went to each home on the list and asked for the person by name, and I witnessed them sign the signature properly. And that's how I did it. That's how I got on the ballot in one weekend, is by using that process. Also doing it over the weekend. The Board of Elections doesn't have time to change a lot of the data and stuff. Which I think they did once a week. So anyway, I went in and I did all that, and then I went and I turned it in on Monday. So there was no window for any of the data to change, for any of the people to move away. I had the data, I went to their house, I asked for their signature, I turned it in. And it was relatively close before the deadline, so there wasn't time for any of them to become invalid by moving away or dying or anything. So that's how I did it, but and that's how it should be done, is you gotta go to people's houses. But what I was told when I advocated that in workshops and stuff like that was that's not fun, and so no one will do it. So it's a situation where it's got to be done. It's got to be done that way, because we've got people from all sides attacking us and kicking us off the ballot for not doing it that way. But it's not fun. So if you have a bunch of people who are going to prioritize doing things fun over doing things right, you can never win. So anyway, I think I'm done for today. So I hope that this was illuminating for people, and I look forward to questions, and I can elaborate in other videos. So see ya. I'm off to work.